Alright, back in 2018 I made a guide on how to do a no Hunter's Dream run in Bloodborne. Now, even though it was a step-by-step walkthrough, it's not exactly a type of run you would want to subject yourself to, because it's kind of a masochist-only type of challenge, and the goal of which is to get a special cutscene where the hunter first wakes up in Hunter's Dream when it's already on fire, which entails going through the game until you beat Mergo's Wetnurse before ever visiting the Hunter's Dream. However, that means not acquiring a starting weapon, not upgrading your weapon, not dying, not leveling up, not acquiring any type of gun, so also not parrying, not using blood gems, not using runes, not using the item or inside shop, no access to your storage box, no fast traveling other than by Hunter's Mark, and not using any pebbles. Okay, that last one is not a requirement, but doing this kind of challenge is already so thrilling that using pebbles on top of that would simply be too much to handle. But all in all, it's essentially a form of self-inflicted torture. However, is there a way to make it at least somewhat manageable? Well, there actually is, by using several glitches and exploits. So this here is my Bloodborne No Hunter's Dream on sort of easy mode. Emphasis on sort of. Especially because getting started in the first place is already extremely RNG heavy. What we need to do is to bait the werewolf at the start to push us right through the gate next to the clinic, which provides us with immediate access to the Forbidden Woods. However, that requires him to do a grab attack from the right angle when you are pressed up against that gate, which is extremely RNG heavy. After all, you can't control the werewolf's movement. The only thing that gives you the highest chance of success is when he does a grab attack that lands him near the gate, because it's very common for him to do a grab attack twice in a row. And then when he has a hold of you, you need to mash L2 and R2, because that alters your character's animation to one where she tries to push the wolf off of her, and that allows you to clip right through the gate. However, every time this fails, or if you take too much damage, you need to quit the game, delete your character, create a new character and try again. So in principle it is very much a waste to heal, because you want to preserve your valuable blood vial pickups, but after restarting over and over again, you're probably like, well, fuck it. As long as I can get through the gate at all, I'm happy. So that's why I picked up the 4 blood vials outside of the clinic and tried again instead of recreating a character for the 20 billionth time. Because it took me almost 90 minutes to even get pushed through the gate once. And then I messed up later on in the run and had to do it all over again. Because the wolf just constantly doesn't want to do the moves you want him to do, which means taking damage and having to restart over and over, which is a pain in the neck. Yeah, so it's an easy way in theory, but not in practice. Now, fortunately, there is an alternative way to heal. If you use the Hunter's Mark, your life bar will automatically refill, and that means having to waste less blood vials. So after opening up the gate, it's best to simply use the Hunter's Mark to go back where you woke up, which not only allows us to punish the werewolf for being such a fucking dick, and he can also drop some extra blood vials, and on top of that, there are 2 more blood vials in the corner right before you exit the clinic. Because the reason blood vials are even more valuable than in a normal run is because no matter how many we pick up, when you haven't visited the Hunter's Dream yet, you can only send items to your storage box, but nothing will automatically replenish. So normally your blood vials would automatically be replenished if you had more than 20 to begin with. But that's not an option in this run. And the thing is that you can still make use of lanterns by lighting them. Now obviously you cannot travel with the lanterns themselves, because then you would transport yourself to the Hunter's Dream. However, whenever you merely light a lantern, that makes it serve as a checkpoint for when you use the Hunter's Mark. So whenever we have taken damage and are near a lantern, or if we have to go back to a certain lantern to begin with, we're going to use the Hunter's Mark to refill our life bar without spending any blood vials. And we also started as the class with the highest vitality, so given that we cannot level up, we can at least get as much out of our health bar as we can, given the restrictions of the run. But that's regarding taking damage. What about dealing damage? After all, our starting weapons are in the Hunter's Dream. Well, the Saw Spear is the earliest weapon you can find in the world itself, and every starting class has the stats to wield that weapon. So picking up that weapon is our first priority. However, an unupgraded Saw Spear does shit damage, of course, especially near the end of the game. So we need a little bit more than that. Well, on our way to the Saw Spear, we can pick up Molotov cocktails. In fact, I even picked up too many, because there are 3 pickups, and the first 2 already add up to 10. And we can only carry 10, unfortunately. And again, we don't have access to our item box. But those 10 Molotov cocktails will help us out greatly against the 3rd phase of Rom the Vacuous Spider. And we also pick up some oil to increase that damage even further. Okay, so on my original video I got multiple comments about the no gun restriction, saying that there are guns out there in the world. Well, yes, but so what? You can level up, so basically almost none of those guns are usable to begin with. And even if they were, the Evelyn for example is in K-Nurse, so not even on our route to begin with. And as someone even suggested the Church Cannon, which is in the DLC, which you cannot access without the Eye of the Blood-Drunk Hunter, which is in the Hunter stream after defeating Amelia, so that's impossible. But even if you somehow could, and even if you would have the stats to wield it, it would require you to defeat Ludwig of all bosses with an unupgraded saw spear. So no, the no gun restriction is not simply a choice, it is practically a necessity. The only two possible options are the transformed version of the rifle spear and the flame sprayer. But to be fair, neither would have much value in this run, especially not unupgraded. And in this version of the run, we're not even visiting Old Yharnam to begin with. Because due to the gate skip, we can immediately go to the Forbidden Woods. So yeah, you're pretty limited at what you can use. An unupgraded saw spear simply has to be what will carry us through this run. So, let's go and get that weapon right now. Okay, once you pick up the saw spear, you will get chased by rats, so don't immediately warp back with the Hunter's Mark. First go all the way around the corner for safety. In fact, that's important to realize for the entirety of the run. Whenever you use the Hunter's Mark, you are vulnerable until the end of that animation. You can take damage while you're in that animation, and some attacks can even cancel it altogether. So doing it near enemies is very risky. Now, although it should not have been necessary, but if you go up the ladder instead of warping back already, you can find another set of oil urns near the crows left of the ladder. It's a risky pickup because you can get shot while climbing up the ladder. And if you do everything correctly, you will not need that oil to begin with. However, I did not do everything correctly, and I was actually unable to completely deplete Rom's health bar with Molotovs alone when he entered his third phase. So as you will see later on, I had to do some risky moves to finish that fight. Meaning that I would not have had to do that if I had picked up those extra oil urns. So to be clear, it's a risky pickup that should not be necessary, but it's very helpful to have some extra items for when you, well, in my case it almost seems to be inevitable, make a mistake. Because not only did I mess up in several ways in my original No Hunter Swim run, I made some pretty grave ones in this one as well. So when that happens, you need to know how to correct those mistakes. This is a hard reset run after all. So in that sense, it is actually good that it happened, because that gives me the opportunity to show you how to correct those mistakes. Well, it's good for you, not for me. For me, it was really frustrating. Okay, so now we can already make our way to the Forbidden Woods, and that is a major benefit for this run. Because that means that we can skip Father Gascoigne, Bloodstarved Beast, and Vicar Amelia. Now, it does entail that we miss out on some important pickups, but with some alternative routing we can mostly make up for that. And instead of the Hunter's attire near Odin Chapel, we can pick up the White Church attire, which although it has lower physical, blunt and frenzy defenses, all its other defenses are higher. Unfortunately, we can only pick it up after going through the poison, and even if you try to spend as little time as possible in the purple goo, you will likely end up getting poisoned right at the very end. Not to worry though, because there are antidotes nearby, so it will only cost us 1 blood vial. At least if you're quick enough. Now, technically you could warp back and use the second antidote on the second time through the poison to save that 1 blood vial, but we don't have to be that stingy. Moreover, in a hard reset run like this, you don't want to drag things out too much. Before going up the roof, kill the dogs in the cages, because if you leave them alive, they will eventually burst out of those cages to ambush you. But more importantly, you want to punish them for being dogs in the video game. And be careful of the crows as well. It's best to attack them from behind. And there are 3 of them on the roof, but if you simply go back down after picking up the attire before putting it on, you only have to take care of the 1 crow right next to that pickup. It's not a necessity, but the blue elixirs inside that building can be very helpful in some places. We don't want to unnecessarily fight with enemies after all, so running past them when only partially visible is obviously a lot less risky. But of course, whenever we are forced to fight, like a boss fight, we need to have some sort of a decent damage output. So how do we do that without upgrading our weapon? Well, that's where beast blood pellets become important. And we can find 9 of them close by. In fact, it's actually rather dumb of me that I did not pick up that first set in my original run. Not that I came up short back then, I believe I even had one left at the end of the run. But still, it's not as risky of a pickup as you might have thought, given all the enemies nearby. In fact, there's another set later on near the cannon that I purposely left behind, because that one is extremely risky to get. Moreover, in this run, we need less resources than in the original one. Because the gate skip was not the only exploit to make this version of the run much easier. The most important skip of all will be the tree skip that allows us to bypass the Shadows of Yhar'gul fight. And that alone makes this version of the run infinitely more doable than the glitchless version. Because the overwhelming majority of the failed attempts of the glitchless run was against the Shadows of Yhar'gul. I mean, fighting them unleveled with a +0 saw spear and no ability to parry, or using something like a shaman bone, is an absolute pain in the nuts. Without a doubt the hardest part of that run. Now, it is also very tricky to bypass them, but that's nothing compared to actually fighting them. Before we continue deeper into the forest, we need to make a little detour to pick up poison knives, which we desperately need for the second phase of the fight against Micolash, and which can also greatly help us out against Mergo's Wetnurse. Now, given that we've skipped Cathedral Ward, we don't have the set of 12 that we can find in that location. However, as you will see later on, there's an alternative way to get there. The only unfortunate thing is that we don't have access to any bolt paper or fire paper. So one thing that is going to be a little bit more difficult in this run versus the glitchless version is the second phase of ROM. Because normally I would use bolt paper there. But of course that's a small price to pay for not having to fight the Shadows of Yhar'gul. Now, speaking of all these skips, you might be wondering something. Shouldn't this video be quite a bit shorter than the one for the glitchless version? Should it have been? Yes. Yes, it should have. But the problem is that some parts of this run took me way longer than it should have. The upcoming skip took me about 10 minutes to perform. The fight against Rom took me a lot longer, and you will later on see why. And because I made a massive and honestly quite stupid mistake against Micolash, that meant wasting quite a bit of time. So, yeah, it should have been shorter, but it didn't actually turn out that way. Okay, so before we do the next skip, it's a good idea to kill Mr. von Eukenstein on the right, because he is guaranteed to drop blood vials. The best way to deal with him is to do chain backstabs followed by viscerals. I actually went for double R2, which is less effective. It's a bit of a reflex that some of you may recognize, because that's how you generally do backstabs on a BL4 run. Because visceral damage gets quickly outclassed by charged R2 attacks, because viscerals scale with your level and your skill stats specifically. So on BL4 it will get outclassed by weapon upgrades. Of course the latter doesn't even apply in this case, and visceral damage is also safe damage. So in that sense it can be useful as well. And speaking of killing enemies, since it's not likely that you will make the tree jump on the first try, it's best to kill the crawling enemies in the vicinity as well. There are more enemies on the other side as well, so if it takes too long to make the jump up the tree branch, then you will either have to kill them too, or you can do a safe quit. If you're unfamiliar with that term, it simply means quitting the game in order to reset enemy positions, or even your own position. And the latter is going to be important, because we're going to clip right through the geometry of the world, and if you fall down, you need to do a safe quit to prevent yourself from dying. And the jump to actually get into the Shadows boss arena is so tricky that it took me about 10 minutes to get the angle right. So yeah, how this can even function as a speedrunner's tactic, I don't know. Well, all I know at least is that I'm not cut out to be one. When you get up the tree, stand still and roll twice, and then you can walk forward to actually get out of bounds. Then past the wall, walk right until you see a very wide tree trunk. That's where you need to do a very tricky kind of jump. First you need to run and roll into the tree until you actually clip partially into it. And you can see if you've done this correctly, because the screen will stop wobbling when you run forward. Because normally the camera would move because you're bumping up against a tree, but that will stop when you clip into it. And then you need to move slightly left around the tree trunk and press hard right while jumping, which is extremely tricky to do correctly. So you will likely constantly fall right through the world, but fortunately that is a long fall, so you should have enough time to do a safe quit to place yourself back on sort of solid ground and then try again. It took me many tries to get it right, so I'll have a timestamp on screen to where I actually succeeded. So I advise you to skip ahead to that moment in the video, because seeing me constantly falling down and safe quitting will get boring very quickly. And of course at the time it was quite frustrating for me when I was recording this run. Okay, I finally managed to do the jump correctly. So now you have to feel your way around for an invisible wall to walk along to guide yourself into the boss arena. Now be careful that you don't go too far to the right, which I almost did, because then you will fall back to where you were before and you will have to do the entire skip all over again. So the way this works is that when you fall into the boss arena and quit the game again, when you start back up, you can fall into the boss arena for a second time, but that time the AI of the shadows is disabled. So that means that you can freely kill the shadows without them being able to fight back. Now, even though their life bars won't show up, they do take damage and eventually die. Emphasis on eventually, because you're doing very little damage to them. However, the only thing you need to watch out for is that you don't get near the fog wall in the front of the arena, where you would normally enter. Because that's a trigger for the boss fight and that will enable their AI. So as long as you don't get near there, you can take as long as you want and it's nothing more than a matter of patience before they die and you can continue onwards into Byrgenwerth. Alright then, that's punishment for making me fail my original run so many times. So in that sense this was quite satisfying. What is less satisfying is that in this white outfit I now look like I used tampon. However, since we've taken fall damage to get here, and since there's automatically a lantern available after a boss fight, we can now restore our lost HP by using the Hunter's Mark. And actually that is something I should have made better use of in my original run as well. Because if you've seen that one, you know that I had to face off against Rom with only a single blood vial. However, I would have had 3 instead of 1 if I hadn't chose to heal with blood vials after the Shadows fight and simply used the Hunter's Mark instead. However, this time around, since we hadn't even had a proper boss fight yet, we can now deal with Rom with 18 blood vials instead of 1. Because there's no known way to skip the fight against Rom, so he will be our first actual boss fight in this run. One of only 3. And I know what some of you are thinking. Aren't only 2 boss fights truly mandatory when using glitches? Well, yes, but actually no. However, let's not get ahead of ourselves, that's something for later. Now technically there is a skip that you can do to get to Rom. In fact there were 2, and one of which was patched, and I believe the other one wasn't. However, I tried to perform it before, but I couldn't get it done. But it is at least possible to glitch through the geometry on the right side of the area where the Byrgenwerth lantern is. I'll have a link to that video with that skip in the description box. However, I simply couldn't pull it off. Regardless, it's not that valuable of a skip anyway, it merely gets you to Rom. So the only benefit is not having to get the key and risk getting arcaned to death by the NPC inside the building. Fortunately, blue elixirs will make it a lot less risky anyway. And yes, elixirs as in plural. I'm not making the same mistake as I did in my original run. Well, at least not that one. I don't know what it is with these hard reset runs, but even when I have everything fully planned out, I just keep on making mistakes anyway. And the most insulting thing is when unsuccessful runs had better executed parts up until the moment of failure than the actual successful run. I guess that's just kind of typical, and it's not merely my experience. A lot of challenge runners and speedrunners complain during their successful attempts that they're doing really poorly or more poorly than usual, and then they end up actually succeeding. I guess the RNG gods have a good laugh at our expense. Speaking of RNG, even though the blue elixirs kept the NPC off my back, when you were granted that many eyes, partial invisibility apparently isn't enough to keep those insect-like students away from me. Fortunately, gravity is the most powerful force in this game. Well, actually, plot armor to not die by gravity in certain circumstances, granted to the player, is even more powerful. Anyway, as I said, it's time for the first actual boss fight, and with an unupgraded weapon and without bolt paper, this is going to be a very lengthy fight. Around 23 minutes in fact. Although it could have been shorter if I picked up those extra oil urns as I mentioned at the start. Or if I had better RNG and or managed to do more damage in the second phase and not have wasted one of my Molotov cocktails on Rom's armored head near the end. Fortunately, the fight itself is quite straightforward. It only requires a lot of patience, because we're pretty much forced to kill every single small spider. We cannot afford to leave those alive. And obviously we cannot one-cycle Rom with such a low damage output for all the smartasses out there. That's not an option under these circumstances. Fortunately, during the first phase, Rom himself is not a threat yet, so we can solely focus on the spiders. But what makes this rather tedious is that you cannot just randomly attack. You need to separate them as much as you can, and constantly pay attention to the spiders close to you when you attack one of their siblings. Definitely fight as much as possible without lock-on, because you need freedom over your movement and the camera. Especially during the second phase, I keep the camera as much as I can on Rom, even if that entails attacking one of the small spiders facing towards the camera. But that's because in the second phase and third phase, Rom himself can attack. For now it's mainly that you need to watch out for jump attacks, spit attacks and charge attacks. You know, the one where a spider dashes forward waving their front legs around. That hits multiple times, it's a combo. And remember that even though we have the highest vitality of any starting class, we are still playing as an unleveled character. Of course our damage output is poor as well, but I advise against using Beast Blood here. I only use one pellet in the second phase against Rom himself. This fight is all about patience anyway, and finding the right opportunities to get attacks in. It's not a DPS fight. Obviously try to attack the spiders as much as you can from the side or behind or right after a jump attack. Attacking from the front can work when hitting them with multiple R1s, because that will knock them back on their hind legs and then you can hit their underside. But of course that should not be your go-to strategy. Once all the spiders are dead, Rom is helpless until he teleports, and that's when the real fight begins. So here's an interesting aspect of this fight. Even though the arena looks infinite in size, it most definitely isn't. And this doesn't happen often, but Rom moves all the way back to one of the invisible edges. Well, it's a good thing that this happened in the first phase, because even if I got stuck, Rom wouldn't be able to do anything anyway. However, if I had to avoid the meteor rain and ran up against an invisible wall, that would have been quite a major issue. Interestingly enough, even though everything looks the same, you can still see where I entered the arena because of the splattered insect corpse. Okay, so now things get dangerous because of the meteor rain. Now, when slowly killing each new spider one by one, you always need to keep the camera on ROM. Because when he raises himself up, that indicates that the meteor rain is coming. So that means that you need to start running so that the meteors will hit the ground behind you. However, ROM can occasionally do it twice in a row. In fact, he did that one time in this very fight. So that's why you need to keep the camera on ROM while you are running. You can do that either by using a claw grip, or the way I do it, by holding the controller up to my face and moving the right thumbstick with my chin. A bit awkward, but it works. But either way, keep the camera on ROM. Otherwise your run can suddenly end by an extra barrage of meteors that you didn't see coming. Moreover, ROM can also do AoE explosions when you get close to him, and roll on his back, which causes meteors to come out of the water. So don't just focus on a single spider, you need to be constantly aware of your surroundings. So even though it's about patience, it's also about endurance, and not merely in the sense of your stamina management, but your own endurance to keep focused during such a lengthy and drawn out fight. Okay, so now Rom is alone again. I actually use a Beast Blood pellet. Not only because he's not helpless this time, but also because I want to do as much damage as possible before he teleports. Of course, contrary to my glitchless run, I don't have the added benefit of bolt paper. So unfortunately, it didn't turn out as well. And the only way I would have been able to drain the rest of his life bar with Molotov cocktails in this third phase is if all 10 were direct hits, and 2 of them supercharged with oil of course. Which doesn't sound like a problem, but given that Rom constantly tries to face you, it is possible to hit his head, and that means that he takes reduced damage. So as I said at the start, in principle it is not necessary, but if you mess up, those 2 extra oil urns beyond where you found the saw spear can make up for a wasted Molotov cocktail. But of course, before we can even use our Molotov cocktails, we have to deal with a third batch of small spiders. So it's still a long way before we can oil up and things get hot. Now, fortunately, the third phase is essentially the same. The only difference is Rom's melee attack, or however you want to call it. Which is exactly the reason why we need Molotov cocktails to begin with, to deal with his third phase, and not before that. Okay, so finally we get our cocktails out. First apply some lube, and then it's, as I said, a matter of not wasting a Molotov cocktail by hitting Rom's head, where he takes reduced damage. Which can be done in two ways. One is to get close enough so that the Molotov hits Rom's back, because you throw it in an arch after all, so it can go over Rom's head, or by throwing it when facing his side. Now of course Rom is constantly spinning like on a record player, because he is designed to constantly try to face you, so another way is to throw when he's in an attack animation. But that is more risky of course. And the reason we cannot get close to him is because of his melee attack. That doesn't have much of a startup animation and it can one-shot us. Or better said, it can hit multiple times before you have the chance to get away. So a one-shot in practice. But of course, if you run out of Molotov cocktails prior to victory, then things become rather tense, because then you have no choice but to finish him off with your saw spear. And that's not an enviable position to be in. Enviable? Envious position? Is that the right way to say it? Well, it's pretty fucked, that's what I'm trying to get across. So, given that happened, it required a bit of improvisation. But what I can at least say is that the safest time to attack Rom is when he has just finished his melee attack. Or shake attack, or limbless hokey pokey, I don't know what you want to call it. His fuck you move, that one. Well, that was one hell of a first boss fight, I would say. No wonder why From Software games have this kind of reputation. Anyway, there's actually something I don't really understand about how cutscenes work in this game. We're doing this for a cutscene after all, which when you think about it is not exactly much of a payoff given the effort it takes to get it, but whatever. The whole point is that since cutscenes are not pre-rendered in this game, that's the reason why you see the workshop on fire when you first wake up there if Mergo is already dead. And also why you see what your character is wearing. However, the bloodstains on your clothes are not rendered for some reason. So before the cutscene you're completely drenched, but during you're squeaky clean. So how does that work? Maybe they are not allowed to show close-up shots of tampon cosplay or something. I mean, Sony is kind of weird about those things, but anyway. So, after defeating Rom, we get access to Yahar'gul, and even though that weird bathtub that we emerged from is not a lantern, it does count as a checkpoint for the Hunter's Mark. I'm already at full health, so I don't have to use it to heal. However, since we've skipped Cathedral Ward, we can actually now go backwards and go there anyway, because we do need some items from that place. Not bolt paper from the Tonitrus NPC, that applied to the glitches run, but we have better options available now. Instead, we're going to get fire paper from Alfred, but more importantly, another set of poison knives. Oh, and some blood vials while we're at it. Now, as far as I remember at least, I don't think I used save quits in my original run. However, this is sort of easy mode, so when opening up the gate to the town square, we're going to sort of de-aggro the enemies by sort of quitting out to sort of get the gate open, resulting in a sort of safety of sorts. Okay, so over here we have a set of 12 poison knives, and given that we have already picked up 8 before in the Forbidden Woods, we now have the maximum of 20. Now, you might wonder, why did I even pick up that set of 8 back in the forest, given that there's another set of 16 further down the street? I mean, that is where I got them in my original run. Well, yes, but I also almost died when picking them up back then, because of the enemy with the wool spinning or wool thread making, the spiky thing that hurts a lot when you get hit by it. And contrary to the one near the ladder back in the woods, the one in this area is much harder to avoid. So actually, even in the glitchless version of a No Hunter's Dream run, it's actually best to get the set of 12 at the beginning of the street and the set of 8 in the woods. Of course, picking up more is useless because they will go to your inaccessible item box anyway.
You're a beast hunter. So why not cooperate?
And given that Alfred was close by to begin with, we might as well get some fire paper from him, so we won't have to waste bolt paper that we will pick up in Yahar'gul, and use that fire paper for the first phase of Micolash instead. So we'll save those bolt papers for Mergo's Wetnurse. And contrary to Micolash, which I had quite a decent fight against in my glitches run, that fight is an absolute shit show in this run, as you will see. However, I handled the Wetnurse way better this time around, because I also have a sort of easy mode strategy for her as well, as you will see. On top of using poison knives, of course. And I really wish I knew about that back then. But before that, we need to traverse the city of Yahar'gul. Well, we'll have to do it anyway to progress through the game, but also to pick up a bunch of bolt paper, as I said. Now, contrary to my glitches run, we're not going to pick up the Tonitrus. Nor can we use it this time around, because I started as a military veteran back then, and a lone survivor for this run. So we don't have the stats for the Tonitors this time. Nor do we need it, because we are not going to fight the One Reborn, because this is sort of easy mode, and we're going to do a sort of easy to perform glitch to bypass the One Reborn altogether. And the sort of is not a joke this time, because if the angle is off when you jump to perform the skip, or you get hit by an enemy right before you jump, you will fall to your death and you will not be able to save yourself with a save quit this time. So it is risky, but it does allow us to completely skip the One Reborn. So for that reason we're going to light the second lantern of this area, so that after we've picked up the second set of wallpaper and activated the One Reborn fight, because we do still have to do that, I'll explain that in a minute, we can warp back to that lantern with the Hunter's Mark to perform that very handy yet quite risky skip. Oh, and of course, make sure that you don't, out of habit, accidentally warp with a lantern after lighting it and mess up your run that way. I mean, that's a similar problem when you do a no bonfire run in Dark Souls. I mean, muscle memory is very important in a game like this, but sometimes you actively have to fight against it. Given that I already had 19 blood vials, I didn't risk picking up the set on the left, but headed straight for the door instead. And then we have to run past 3 NPC hunters, and you do have to be very careful of especially the one with the rifle spear and cannon, because he might chase you all the way to where the wallpaper is. But I mentioned at the start, when doing the gate skip, that I already failed this run as well. And to be specific, I got one-shotted by having my face blown off by that hunter's cannonball. Yeah, so that can happen. This time he didn't even chase me that far. However, you need to keep it in mind. So if you want to know why I didn't even bother picking up that set of wallpaper in my original run, well, that's one reason. And on top of that, I didn't need it because of the Tonitors a little further ahead. Of course, getting that weapon and safely Hunter's Marking back was kind of a shit show as well. But you know, that is basically what a run like this comes down to. As I said back then, it is bad for your heart. And if you want a specific example, since I had to continue onwards towards the One Reborn to make the upcoming glitch work, I tried to immediately get into the teleporting bathtub because of the dogs around there, and you have iframes doing that animation, but my turn was too sharp and I got stuck between the dog and the side of the doorway. So yeah, hopefully in the future we can get copper wiring to reroute our fear of pain, because I apparently don't have nerves of steel. Now fortunately, Hunter's Marking back out of the One Reborn fight is not as nerve-wracking as it might seem, because I did of course test this before, because it is possible that you will get hit by a projectile when warping back. However, you can neither get one-shotted by that, nor will it cancel that animation. So it may not look that safe, but as long as you do it immediately, you will be fine. Okay, so this is how the One Reborn skip works. We need to make a very specific jump to clip through the geometry to activate the kill cam, yet survive. Meaning that we will be able to move around from a top-down perspective. And in order to do that safely, we first need to get rid of the enemies near that little spire. So the gunman over there needs to die, just hit him when he raises his gun until you whittle down his health. And the dogs we're going to lure away, which is very scary, but unfortunately very necessary, because those fuckers are able to knock you over the edge right before you try to do the jump from the spire. And again, you will not be able to save yourself from that. Okay, so we're going to jump onto that spire and then run into it while we're clipped onto it to build up momentum for the second jump. And that jump needs to be at a 90-degree angle, which, as I said, activates the kill cam, but the fall isn't long enough to actually kill you. Okay, so the controls are very awkward because pushing up on the left thumbstick moves you forward towards the side that you are facing, so not the top of the screen. So now we're going to make our way to the One Reborn's boss arena. Because since we activated the boss fight before, when we get there, the cutscene won't play, and the fog wall is already up, or better said, it should be there, but because of the kill cam, neither the enemies, nor the boss, or even the fog wall will actually spawn. And that means that we can freely walk through the boss arena, and then activate the corpse of Micolash to transport ourselves to the lecture building. And by doing that, we skip the One Reborn fight altogether, using this very interesting glitch. And no, I don't consider the way I fought him in the original run a glitch. I mean, it was certainly a cheese tactic, because it was about hitting him right through a wall, but hitting things through walls and getting hit through walls is almost like a staple of From Software games. That wouldn't be an example of a particularly good one, but we all know that it's going to be present in Elden Ring as well. Well, if that game actually ends up existing, that is. Alright, and there we are. We don't have to pick up anything in this building itself, so let's immediately continue into the Nightmare of Menses. And I didn't bother using the Hunter's Mark to heal the previously taken fall damage, because in a minute we can pick up another set of blood vials anyway. So we will actually enter the fight against Micolash with the maximum amount of blood vials. We have 2 blue elixirs left, so let's use them to make the road towards Micolash a little easier on ourselves. Regardless, you are not completely invisible, and especially not to enemies close by. So it is a benefit, but it's not magic. Or maybe it is magic, I don't know. So, some of you may be wondering something. Especially if the reason you were already aware of all these skips was because you saw Infa's video on how to beat Bloodborne in only 2 boss fights. And yes, you are correct, there is a way to skip Micolash. But first of all, that would require help from a friend. So that's obviously not an option. But even if you do it the way he did, by having a second PS4, it's still not going to work in this case, because you cannot summon anyone without the summoning bell. And where do you get that item? Yeah, in Hunter's Dream. So as much as I would want to skip the fight against Micolash, that's simply not an option. Now, we are going to cheese both phases of Micolash, but especially phase 1 is kind of RNG heavy, and simply very risky in general. However, in phase 2 I made a really stupid mistake, and it was quite a hassle to correct that mistake. Moreover, it resulted in having a harder Wetnurse fight than necessary as well. Well, the good thing at least is that I was very aware of how you can correct for that mistake. And for this guide it's therefore actually quite helpful that it happened. But it was obviously not intentional and quite frustrating when you're near the end of a hard reset run. I guess that this is one of the reasons why I don't do that many hard reset runs to begin with, and why I don't attempt speedrunning. Because even if I know exactly what to do, I still end up forgetting things and making mistakes. But of course, knowing how to recover from mistakes is very important for a challenge runner as well. That's for damn sure.
some say cosm. Do you hear our prayers? No, we shall not abandon the dream. No one can catch us. No one can stop us now.
Okay, so here's how you can deal with Micolash under these restrictions. Because the main issue here is that we have an unreasonably low damage output, and the room where you normally fight him has respawning skeletons. So instead, we're going to lure him into that room, but then we will lure him back out into that little hallway that connects that room to the rest of the maze. So make sure that you don't approach Micolash from the side when he's in front of that hallway, because if you approach him from the front, he will then go inside that room. However, before we can go in ourselves, we need to clear away the skeleton that's close by that little hallway. To be more specific, we need to lure it back down the stairs, because killing it is not enough. He will respawn after all. So in order to prevent him from bothering us when we're fighting Micolash in that hallway, we need to make sure that he dies near the bottom of the stairs. So that will be the place where he respawns, and we don't have to worry about accidentally aggroing him later on. Alright, so now it's time to lure Micolash into that little hallway. Unfortunately, this is really RNG heavy, so it can take quite a while. The way it works is that you need to stand just outside of the room until Micolash gets close enough to the door opening. And then when he's in the door opening, you need to move to the other side of the hallway to lure him further inside. And then you can get him sort of stuck in there. Very much emphasis on sort of there. Because he is designed to go back to that room. Or what's even more frustrating, and what actually almost happened in my case, if he is near the other end of the hallway, he can actually go back into the maze itself. Now to be clear, even though this is a cheese tactic, it's very tense and very dangerous because it doesn't prevent Micolash from attacking. You need to constantly sidestrafe his Augur of Abritus move while you are in that narrow hallway. Moreover, the sides of this hallway have these little pillars, and if you get stuck against those, you will not be able to avoid his attack. Moreover, when reapplying your buffs, your movement slows down and that leaves you vulnerable. And on top of that, you need to try to keep Micolash away from both doorways. Because as I said, he will either go back into the maze or back into the room. So yes, it is a cheese tactic because it allows you to fight him one-on-one without having to worry about the skeletons. But it's not that easy to perform correctly and it requires some precise movement and patience. And of course, this far into the run, you tend to get very nervous. And that makes you susceptible to mistakes as well. Which I did, and not to mention that massive mistake I made in the second phase. But you will see that later on. Alright, so that was phase 1, but now phase 2. Fortunately, we don't have to directly fight him at all, because this is why we picked up the poison knives earlier on in the run. We're simply going to repeatedly poison him from the balcony while staying completely out of his range. So what could possibly go wrong then? Well, there is one thing. And even though I knew this, I even explicitly mentioned this in my original video. I was completely aware of this, but somehow while doing this run, I had it backwards in my mind. The poison trick only works if Micolash jumps down. If he teleports there using the mirror, it doesn't work. Somehow I had that backwards in my head, and I foolishly thought that was the other way around. So I chased him towards the mirror, and then I started poisoning him, and of course it didn't work. It didn't get the loop started. And that's a problem, because when you waste even a single poison knife, that means that after this fight you will not be able to poison Mergo's Wetnurse 3 times in a row. Because it takes 8 poison knives to take down Micolash, and 4 are required to poison the Wetnurse a single time. So 3 times for the remaining 12, given that we have the maximum amount of 20. Ergo, if you waste even a single knife, that increases the chance of failing the run at the final boss. Well, at least I do have a better way of dealing with the Wetnurse, which I wasn't even aware of when I did my glitchless run back in 2018. But regardless, you do have to know how to deal with Micolash choosing the mirror over directly jumping down anyway. And unfortunately, that is a real hassle, because you need to chase him around until he eventually decides to go back up and actually take the left path and jump down. And that can take a while. So this far into the run, especially when you realize you have wasted your valuable poison knives, that's really frustrating. So remember that even doing a no Hunter's Dream run on sort of easy mode, it's still very much bad for your heart. Okay, he finally decides to jump down. So now we can get the poisoning process started. It takes 2 knives to poison him, and because he jumped down, he will get stuck in a loop where he constantly disappears and reappears while the poison slowly eats away his life bar. Why that only works when he jumps down, I don't know. But that is the only way you can cheese him like this. Okay then, that happened. But now we can make our way to the final challenge of this run. And here's where in my original guide I made a mistake in the commentary in which I made it sound like Iosefka's blood vial was a possible boss fight. What I of course meant to say was that there is nothing left to pick up with the possible exception of Iosefka's blood vial, which can be found in a chest next to the elevator that takes you up to Mergo's Wetnurse. So you might as well pick it up, so that if it happens that you run out of blood vials, you at least have 1 extra healing item. Now, you do take a little bit of fall damage along the way, so technically you could take the other elevator down and light the lantern that appeared after Micolash to use the Hunter's Mark, but given that I had 20 blood vials already, and Iosefka's blood vial then, I really didn't feel like that was necessary, despite now not having enough poison knives to poison the Wetnurse 3 times. Because as I said before, this time I have a better way of fighting the Wetnurse. The most dangerous part of that fight, after all, is when she summons clones. However, we are going to prevent her from doing that altogether. Alright, first move back and use 4 poison knives. There is a chance that she will dodge one of them, so be quick. Moreover, if you leave too long of a pause between each knife, the poison buildup will not be high enough. Fortunately, in this case, since I cannot poison her 3 times anyway, I do actually have 2 spare ones if I happen to miss. She's quite weak to poison, so that makes up for our terrible damage output. Fortunately, with a full beast blood meter, it's not so bad. So make sure that you make good use of transform attacks, because that fills up the beast blood meter much faster. On top of that, transform attacks do more damage to begin with. The Wetnurse by herself is not really a tough boss to handle. The only annoying thing is that when she does a lawnmower attack, even if you're behind her, you can get clipped at the very edge of the hitbox. However, with these many blood vials, that's not that big of a deal. Unless you get comboed, of course. So make sure that when you take damage, you quickly get out of her reach and heal yourself. But what is extremely dangerous is the purple haze phase. Purple haze phase? Yeah, okay, the clone summoning thing. Now, normally I would start running around the arena, which makes it definitely more survivable. But you can still very easily get hit from off screen. So instead, we're going to prevent her from summoning altogether. And I'm not talking about staggering her while she is in the summoning animation. I don't even know of a consistent way to make sure that actually happens. No, there's a much better way. Because here's the surprising truth about the clone summoning phase. It's actually an AoE attack. Yes, I'm serious. It's an AoE attack that hits your character and that triggers the appearance of the clones. But if it's an attack that hits your character, that means that you can iframe it. And that is indeed possible. When she summons the clones, she does that by summoning a purple wave, and that's the AoE attack. So by dodging through it, more specifically by spam dodging backwards, if you do that correctly, you get saved by your iframes, and therefore no clones will appear. And that makes this fight significantly, emphasis on significantly, better for your heart. And we're done! That's how far you can get towards the end of the game without visiting the Hunter's Dream. After all, that's where the game comes to an end, when Gurman beheads us. But of course, since we haven't visited that place before, we now get the special cutscene where we first wake up in the Hunter's Dream, but the workshop is already on fire. Still a difficult run this way, but with all these skips and exploits, you at least don't have to be that insane to give it a try. Oh, and we obviously have to get naked to celebrate this accomplishment. Yeah, again, it's not much of an actual payoff for the amount of trouble you need to go through to actually get it. Yeah, but then again, the entirety of existence is pointless and we're all going to die and rot away and get forgotten and such, and then all life goes extinct and eventually the entire universe will become a meaningless void due to its inevitable heat death. So, gotta do something with this cruel joke called life, right? Anyway, let's convince an old guy we actually never met before to decapitate us. Oh, and don't go anywhere yet, because there is one more question that needs an answer. So after the cutscene, I have some additional footage to answer that burning question.
Good hunter, now you will die. You will be from this. Farewell, my keen hunter. Fear the blood.
So here is one final question to answer. What happens if your first death is from a snatcher? Will you wake up in a Hunter's Dream? Or will it transport you to the cell in the early version of Yahar'gul? Well, let's find out the answer right now. Place your bets. Well, you're not going to win anything, it's more of an expression. And there we have the answer. It transports you to the Hunter's Dream. So that means that a no Hunter's Dream run absolutely demands that you do it without dying. Not that getting transported to Yahar'gul would be helpful in the first place, since Paul would be in your way of leaving that place. But at least now we have the answer. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and a comment. And if you want to see more of me, consider subscribing to the channel. And check out my original glitchless no Hunter's Dream guide, if you haven't already. And I have a whole bunch of other From Software Challenge Run guides. And of all kinds of other games as well. Hopefully I will be able to get a PS5 soon and get started with the Demon's Souls remake. So that's something for the future. Thank you all for watching and I hope to see you again for another challenge in another video. See you next time.